Now, I want to take you back to 1983. You weren't born yet? And you're like, I totally wasn't born yet. 1983, picture me. I'm 13 years old. I basically look like I look now, but without the beer gut. I'm about this tall. I have a full head of hair, but I have the same voice. Picture a 40-pound, skinny 13-year-old with this voice. It's like, what you talking about, Willis? And I was in a place called Oshawa, Ontario. Now, for those of you who aren't Canadian, which I'm assuming most of you aren't, Oshawa, Ontario is Canada's Flint, Michigan. Yeah. It's beautiful. And I grew up quite poor, down the street 1 mile from Canada's largest General Motors plant. So there I am as a 13-year-old, the youngest kid of 4. I'm wearing a complete wardrobe of hand-me-down clothes, right? 3 older siblings, everything I got was always way too big. So I had, I'd get the pants and I'd have to, hike them up to nipple level, right? It was like a Levi's halter top is what this was. Other kids had, Star Wars or, the Buffalo Bills or their name. They're like, Michael. And because it was hand-me-down, I just had occupant, right? That's what was on my T-shirt. So that's me as a 13-year-old. And on this particular day, in December of 1983, I wanted to get home really badly. I mean, really badly. I bypassed the 7-Eleven. I skipped home because on that day, it was the premiere of Michael Jackson's Thriller. You've known it. You've seen it. Now let me just tell you a little bit about this video. The world premiere, the first time, 14 minutes, are you kidding me? We had never seen a music video that's 14 minutes long. Who sits down for 14 minutes? Clearly this is before TEDx. For 14 minutes, this was an amazing piece of content. It had a budget that is, by today's standards, of about $2 million, directed by John Landis. An incredible piece of film. It's the only music video to go into the film registry by the Library of Congress. They showed it in a movie theater so that it could qualify for Oscar nominations. This was an incredible piece of content. Or was it? Because in the summer of 1983, the Thriller album had descended from number 1 in the top album charts all the way down. It started to lose steam. Thriller was the 7th single to be released off that album. The album was completely losing steam, and worse, they had a global tour, the Victory Tour, to produce. Pressure was on. They got to get the momentum back, baby. They needed something fast. And Michael said, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll drink Pepsi and put my hair on fire if that's what it takes. And Thriller was constructed completely, 100%, exclusively to drive and reinvigorate the sales of the album and to create momentum through the winter seasons for the fall that was going to be, for the tour that was going to be launching in the spring. It was an ad. It was a 14-minute ad, and we let them get away with it. The reason we let them get away with it is because the world back then was constructed in a really lovely way. There were 2 parts of this world. There was, boom, stuff they wanted to see and stuff they had to see. And the stuff they had to see paid for the stuff they wanted to see, and that was a nice little agreement between us, between the content providers and producers and the advertisers who funded it all. And if you were lucky enough to be blessed with the title, You Belong in Content Time, you could do whatever the hell you wanted. You could take people and drive them as indirectly as you wanted to into an additional revenue stream, like a tour, like an album, and no one said anything because you were quote-unquote content. Now things quickly changed. And us as content marketers, we looked at this and said, this is a wonderful opportunity for us. We realized this. But we didn't realize it because of the benefit of content. We realized it because of the weakness of advertising. And we looked out to the landscape and said, and you've heard this message 4 million times. The average consumer sees 80,000 messages today. It's a mobile world. Everybody is on Facebook. Advertising is decreasing in performance. No one sees an ad anymore. We're in a Netflix world where there's no such ads. We can skip it. We can bypass it, everything else. And so we looked at that and said, what are we going to do? And we looked across the fence at those guys and said, what are they doing? Let's be like them. And so we said, brands need to act like media properties. But the thing we forgot to say was the other part of this equation was that media properties needed to act like brands. And from that moment, there was a slow decline. The world of content completely changed. And we started aspiring to be the people on the other side of the fence, even though they were going down in flames. This is the model we're all aspiring to be, the content providers. Have you seen what's happening to pure content companies? This is like if you're a baseball team saying you should be like the Baltimore Orioles. This is not a good place to be. Hello, Baltimore, welcome to the room. There we go. Awesome. That's right. Because of that, because we always related to the content world has completely changed. Content marketing is dead, but don't worry, it wasn't marketing. It was content that killed it. Content completely killed it for us. It's completely changed the game. And here's why. So this is what happened very quickly to all these content providers. So the first thing was cost of production, zip, came down, and I'm talking overnight. That we used to need satellite trucks, and we needed studios, and we need triple scale talent and makeup, and then boom, cost of production goes down. Now we can all shoot a broadcast quality TV show with the phone in our pockets. We've heard this before, but bam, they take a hit. The people we're aspiring to be like take a massive hit. Then, of course, we got massive global distribution. One of the things that the content providers had in their power was this exclusive distribution system that only they had access to. And then, boom, overnight, bam, big hit to the content providers because now all of us can distribute content. And we know what happens when we have a really low cost of production with global and instantaneous distribution is you end up with niche content, or as you say south of the border, niche content. And so you find your niche, and they're not set up that way. There is an entire ecosystem filled within the large content providers, within the traditional content providers, that can't deliver on that. They have six-figure salespeople. They have floors and process and systems completely designed for mass distribution. Bam, they get hit again. So what do? They start to fight back. What does a dog do when you corner them? They poop themselves. No, they bare their teeth is what they do. And that's what these guys start to do. So what do? Well, first thing they do is they go, we always used to be just a newspaper company, or always just a broadcaster, or always just a movie company. And suddenly now, they're using the content that they have generated to drive people to other places. For more information, go to our website, where there is a completely different revenue stream over here, and we need to do this in order to stay relevant, in order to stay afloat. So they now start to use the content to their own advantage, to drive people to a separate place, which is a completely different revenue stream. They start to fight back. They start to merge and converge, the great convergence of media companies. Again, they went from being these silos, we're exclusively a newspaper, to now we're actually a telco. Or we're a cable company. Or we're a massive media conglomerate, or an global entertainment enterprise. They now have other interests where they can use the content to drive people, and we let them get away with it because they're in the quote-unquote content box. In Canada, there's a company called Rogers Communications. They're a cable company, they're a cell phone company, they're a media company, and they own the Toronto Blue Jays, my favorite baseball team. No offense, Baltimore. And there was this time when I flipped on Sportsnet that they owned. The cable that is coming into my house, I pay Rogers. It's owned by Rogers. The show I was watching was actually a radio show owned by Rogers that airs on a radio station owned by Rogers, which has got cameras in it, which is repurposed as a TV show owned by Rogers, which airs on a television network owned by Rogers. And when they cut to commercial break, they advertise cell phones owned by Rogers. The only thing that makes that entire ecosystem possible is that they need something to talk about. The Toronto Blue Jays. They own that too. So when the Toronto Blue Jays is the lead story on the news that night, is that really the lead story, or is it an ad to drive bums in seats for an additional revenue stream for a different part of the company? They get away with it because we've said that they're quote-unquote content. But there's absolutely no difference between them using the content to drive to the baseball stadium as it is to drive to a pharma company's website. The great convergence increased their business interests. And now, again, they start to look at how can they start to fuse all of this together in an ecosystem that's really, really profitable because we've backed them into a corner. So now they start to blur the lines. We used to be content time and ad time, and they're like, we can take a product over here and we can move it into the content box because we're content. We can do that. We can get away with it. But it's an ad. And we let them do it. So now product placement comes in. And then we have this world of Netflix and Google and Facebook, which now, just every time they take one step forward, we knock them back 2 steps. Because just as they start to figure it out by being flexible with advertising revenue, we come at them and go, oh, most of the advertising budgets are going to go over here. We met with a client 2 weeks ago whose budget is about $4 million, and 80% of that budget is going to search. We're not seeing it. The traditional content companies aren't seeing it. They're being backed further into a corner. And when that happens, now they start to eat your lunch. They now start to use the content that we've given them the agreement that it can sit in the content time to sell other things even more. BuzzFeed owns Tasty. Tasty came out as a content player doing recipe videos, and now you can buy Tasty pots and pans at Walmart. They're starting to eat your lunch. And as advertisers, we keep apologizing for it, saying we'll be content marketers. We're going to play a little bit in your world so that we can have all the attributes of being quote-unquote content when really we have a sales bias and we're trying to drive people down a sales funnel. They're trying to do the exact same thing. And then we came back and we said, oh, no, but we've got influencers now. And influencers are going to be the great divide. This is going to be the thing that's going to separate us, because now we have this authentic consumer voice that is coming in without a sales bias whatsoever. We're going to start and we're going to go to them. And what we did was we turned them into media properties too. And now we're starting to complain at the variety of content that they're creating. This is just station produced. That's all it is. Creating content for a unique audience. So they completely lost the credibility. They're now a media property like everybody else. So the worlds continue to try and get fuzzy and fuzzy and fuzzy, and then of course we just killed organic to the point that pretty much most of what we do now has amplification dollars behind it. That distribution strategy is absolutely critical. And so we started out with these 2 very distinct worlds of content and advertising. And what we've ended up with is this new season of Survivor of who's going to survive through this new ecosystem. Who is the village going to say, or whatever they say? What's the line on the show? You've been voted off, or the tribe has spoken, or the tribe has spoken, right? I'm sorry, HuffPo, the tribe has spoken. You're going to have to leave the island or whatever. That's where we're at. We're at this place where any ad can actually be a content it can be content if it's good enough. And any piece of content can be an ad if it's authentic enough. And so we have to sit here as content marketers and say, how do we play in this world? We've defined ourselves by having the attributes of the content providers. What we need is one system. We need one approach. We need one process. And it doesn't matter whether you've traditionally defined it as an ad or whether you've traditionally defined it as a piece of content. It's all just tactics. And we need to elevate this conversation to something that's a little bit more important. We have to stop being content marketers We have to come back to being marketers. And we can't ignore tactics that are going to drive the business. If we want a career, we have to get out of being a tactical specialist and being whole-scale marketers. The reason is that people used to vote with their wallets, and now they vote with their time. And we're just battling for time. That's it. And we're battling for time against content providers. We're battling for time against influencers. We're not competing against the people that we have typically competed against. We're competing against the internet, and quite frankly, it's kicking our ass right now. So what do we do? If this is the case, that we're all just in the battle for time, we have to have that as our filter. That is this good enough? Is this relevant enough? Is this interesting enough? Is this funny enough to cut through? Because what we've done a lot of is we've now tried to game the system. We're trying to gamify it. We're trying to cheat the system to go, what can we just check the boxes so that we're doing all the things that we learned at Content Marketing World, even though the piece that we knew was really important. Tom Webster's going to talk about podcasts. We're going to go, Tom told us to do podcasts, but if we don't come in and look at that and say, yes, this is a very viable and growing type of content, but if the podcast itself is shitty, we're not going to win the battle for time. We're just not. So we have to have this as our filter, that we think this only exists in pre-roll. This exists in every single piece of communication that we have, including face-to-face. And we treat face-to-face conversations the same way we treat this online, where we're hovering about, where are you going? What would I say? What happened? What? You don't like the session? Is this your computer? It's so bad, you're leaving your stuff. It was the Baltimore Orioles crack, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh.
She still didn't say where she's going.
I think we all know.
I think we all know? Really? Yeah. You're like, you're an idiot if you don't know where she's going. So we know this, right? We know that when you hover, you see this pop up and you're counting down, right? You're like, can I do it now? Can I do it now? Can I do it now? 3, 2, 1. We do the same thing face to face. You get stuck to somebody and you're like, I'm a data analyst. And you're like, can I do it now? Can I do it now? Well, how fast can I get out of this conversation? So we need to continually win the battle for time. And how we do this is very simple. We do it, it's based on what we think, what we do, and what we say. This is great brands are based on what they think, do, and say. Great leaders are based on what they think, do, and say. Great organizations are based on what they think, do, and say.